Voters nationwide at the polls to weigh in on hundreds of House races, 35 Senate races, and governor's races in 36 states. But most Americans will have the man who is not on the ballot today, President Trump, on the mind. Good evening, everyone. I'm Zach Wheeler. Thanks for joining us for live election coverage on mytwintiers.com. The polls are closed in Pennsylvania. Let's take a look. There are two candidates running for Pennsylvania's governor, incumbent Democrat Governor Tom Wolf and a Republican challenger Scott Wagner well, we don't have those right now. So let's don't even worry about it. Clearly, oh, there we go. All right, this is just coming in. The poll's closed. 87% Tom Wolf, 12% Scott Wagner. That changed over the last few minutes there. Let's take a look now at the next race. This is the United States Senate race in the state of Pennsylvania. Those numbers are coming into a specific amount of precincts are reporting this, and this is obviously our unofficial results. Bob Casey, 86%. The son of the former governor many years ago in the great state of Pennsylvania, Bob Casey Jr., serving out has been an active senator in that state for quite some time. Lou Barletta from Hazleton, Pennsylvania, not that far from us here. A congressman trying to unseat him right there. It looks like it's been a pretty long night ahead. We'll see. NBC has confirmed that Bob Casey is the winner of that election. We will wait for more precincts to come in as they do. Let's move on now. For both Democrats and Republicans, there is a lot on the line tonight. The results of the midterm elections will no doubt have a major impact on America's politics. Our D.C. correspondent Mark Meredith has more on the balance of power.
For both Democrats and Republicans, there is a lot on the line tonight, and perhaps the person who will be most impacted by the results, President Trump. It's the scene playing out all across the country. People waiting in line, voting on what matters to them.
Because I'm not on the ballot, but will they go? But in a way I am on the ballot, and I would accept that.
President Trump told us he's optimistic Republican voters will turn out in droves to embrace his agenda. The president will spend election night at the White House watching the results in the residence. This year, 35 Senate seats and all 435 House seats are up for grabs.
Today, every second is about winning this election.
Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, who hopes to become Speaker if Democrats win the House, will watch the results unfold at a Washington hotel. Former Vice President Joe Biden says the stakes could not be any higher.
This is the single most important off-year election in my lifetime.
Experts say it's also become the most expensive midterm election ever. The Center for Responsive Politics estimates $5 billion has been spent on ads, events, and polling. Political analyst Gary Nordlinger says whatever the results, count on President Trump to stay the course.
Trump has gotten enough confidence in his presidency to be Donald Trump.
As for what the results will be, experts say that depends on turnout and what issues voters decide matter most to them. One thing to watch out for tonight will be the exit polling, where voters will have a chance to tell volunteers what made them want to go out and make sure their voice was heard. We'll be able to decipher those results to get a better idea of why either party had a good or bad night. Reporting in Washington, I'm Mark Meredith.
I'm joined now by Dr. Dean Fisher, Provost at SUNY Corning Community College. Thanks so much for stopping by tonight.
Glad to be here.
This is a crucial election for our nation. Just what are your predictions tonight? It's kind of hard, isn't it?
Well, it's terribly hard.
Yeah.
It's an unusual year. You've got highly polarized opinions about the president. Not terribly unusual in American history that you've got divisiveness around opinions about the president. You've got the unpredictable nature of where the youth vote's going to go. You've got a good economy, which many people will be aware of, but the polarizing topic of immigration. It's very likely, I think, that the Republicans will hold the U.S. Senate. I think it's much more problematic for the House to be held.
Yeah, they got 435 seats in the U.S. House that are up for re-election tonight. And as you mentioned, 35 Senate seats are in play and some 40 governorships. So it should be quite interesting to see how this plays out. Do you think the Republicans will probably keep control over at least maybe the House as well?
I don't see the road to the House being retained by the Republicans. The The numbers are all over the place in terms of the polls, but 25 to 35 seats, I would guess, would be lost. It's not unusual for a midterm election, particularly with the president where the popularity is at this moment. The Republicans are at the advantage in the U.S. Senate, where only 10 of those seats are in play for them, and those are in pretty safe Republican states right now.
Yeah, we're seeing all the numbers are coming in. I know every part of the nation. Obviously, the polls close at different times.
Sure.
So we just were polls closed obviously in Pennsylvania, and the numbers are slowly coming in. Only 1% or 2% of the precincts were reporting at this time, and of course those will fluctuate throughout the night. And Dr. what was interesting is, do you think the president has a major impact? Is this a lot, when you mentioned the youth vote, do you think a lot of young people are going to come out whether for the president or against the president's agenda, but they've been kind of on fire politically over the last 2 years since his election?
I think the enigma, and we'll see what the returns tell us tonight, is that the polls clearly are suggesting, along with about every other measure that we can point to, that the youth vote is distressed by what they see with the current leadership. Whether they showed up today and voted will be the real measure. Youth vote is typically fairly small compared to the older voters.
Yeah, they've been saying this. This has been the recurring theme over the last few days concerning the millennial vote and whether millennials will show up. There's been major campaigns always. It seems there's always a campaign with a celebrity or two that are trying to push them out.
Older voters show up. Typically and historically, youth voters do not.
Yeah, those are the statistics. It's quite interesting. Let's take another look maybe at some of the numbers as we just mentioned. 40 minutes since the polls have closed in Pennsylvania. Let's see what we're looking at right now. I believe we have, we're still trying to get some info. There's, well, representative for General Assembly, obviously, right there, Clint Eilert. He won that special election during the primary after the retirement of Matt Baker, who was in the House for many, many years, a great General Assemblyman, as we say in Pennsylvania, or representative there. They have the General Assembly, where we here in New York have the Assembly, so it's quite a different kind of thing, and we're still waiting those numbers come in. Meanwhile, we are seeing new numbers now coming in from United States Senator Bob Casey, 79%, and Lou Barletta, 20%. Still low number of precincts reporting. Only it's been 40 minutes. NBC News has already confirmed and called this race for Bob Casey, but we're going to wait on that. And we're looking at Congress here. This is a pretty big deal because Tom Marino has been in that office for quite some time, and he was also a major supporter of the president way before he even was elected or he won his party's nomination for the presidency. We're talking about President Trump. And Mark Freenberg, he's unknown me, but it's quite interesting to see here. Meanwhile, in governor, we're seeing Tom Wolf right now, 80%. Scott Wagner, 19%. And the governor is leading in this race. Moving forward, I believe, what's interesting is to see the early returns, because like you mentioned, we really don't know where they're coming from in the sense of what districts or what precincts.
The polls I was seeing on the governor's race there in Pennsylvania, Governor Wolf's been polling 9 to 12 points ahead. I don't think that there are a few that I could imagine that would think that he would lose. It won't end up like this. No.
Do you think we're going to see a lot of tight races tonight?
Nationally?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think we are in an incredibly close situation. You've got, I was watching and taking in some numbers this morning about how incredibly tight the balance is within a percentage of many races around the country. It's going to be a long night.
And when the president he comes away with multiple scenarios here. Obviously, he could have a majority, or he could have one of the houses. Either way, moving forward, what do you think he needs to focus on, if anything?
You're asking me to give advice to President Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think you could take some advice from you. You're right.
I guess my advice would be to probably tone down the rhetoric. None of us are well served by the divisiveness. The most effective historical leaders have usually been those that communicated hope, whether it was President Roosevelt with the New Deal or the person that got the nomenclature of the great communicator with Ronald Reagan, John Kennedy, Barack Obama communicated a positive vision for the future. That's something that typically Americans will gravitate to, is a positive message, someone that projects hope for the future.
You mentioned Ronald Reagan. I remember studying his communication skills in political science during school in college, and quite amazing the way he brought about that spirit of hope to the nation, but also just the way he communicated was very positive and loving.
You know, if you recall the dark days that Franklin Roosevelt took over, it was a pretty dismal time in American history with the Great Depression. He communicated a positive message. We're going to get through this. John Kennedy certainly did that. President Reagan certainly did that, and I think President Obama did that. I think Americans will respond historically more positively to that message of hope than they will to the message of fear.
All right, message of fear. Let's look in. We've got about 10 minutes now, maybe a little bit more, maybe 10, 15 minutes before the polls close in New York, and then we're going to start to see those numbers roll in. Again, all 435 seats in the U.S. House are up for re-election, and 35 Senate seats are in play, as are almost 40 governorships, including Pennsylvania and New York. And the balance of power is virtually at every state legislature, and that's another thing we're going to be touching on in just a few minutes. We're not getting many numbers here from the representative for General Assembly between Kerry Heath and Clint Allett. Remember, these are coming from the specific counties, so you know, it's going to take a little while depending on where we're at. So they're coming from a specific county, but we remember, okay, we're moving on here. United States Senator, we are seeing some little bit of change in the numbers here, not by much, just by a percentage. 77% for Bob Casey Jr., the incumbent Democrat over Congressman Lou Arletta. 30% of the precincts are reporting, and probably, like you mentioned, those major cities, their equipment is a little bit more quicker, obviously, than rural Pennsylvania.
Yeah, if you look at a map of Pennsylvania, far western Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh and its suburbs, and then Philadelphia, those are mostly blue counties. So depending on the timing of when these precincts come in, it can look very skewed at various points. Yeah,
NBC already calling Bob Casey the winner, but like we said, these numbers are going to change.
If you're asking me to make a prediction, I'm confident that Casey will be senator and the governor will be the governor.
Yeah, there you go. There's the prediction. We heard it here
Governor Wolf.
No, yeah, you know, and we're moving on. This is an interesting race, though, and I want to stay on this for a few seconds.
This one intrigues me more because that's a much more tightly compacted district.
Yeah, well, this also has to deal with, which is unique, is that Pennsylvania's redistricting came into play a few, not too long ago. I remember that we were reporting on this, but this, I mean, Tom Marino has been a namesake for the Republican Party, and for that district, we're seeing quite a turnaround here with the precincts reporting.
Well, and Zach, you actually mentioned how many governor's races are in play, and the redistricting. With 2020, we'll have a new census. That's going to be critical to control the apparatus of a state to apportion out the districts. It's critical in terms of drawing those districts, and obviously Democrats and Republicans both want to control that process.
Yeah, and moving on now, here we too, like we just mentioned, Tom Wolf, 77%, Scott Wagner. And do you think that Scott had a little temper tantrum Facebook video?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that had anything to do with this, the returns here that we're seeing come in.
I think any time that you show emotion and temper, it's not going to be well received by the public, because you want somebody that's got the gravitas and the temperament to rule.
Yeah, that's true. That's an interesting point there. So we're going to keep an eye on that, obviously, as those numbers develop over the next few minutes. But as we were saying, it's an interesting, congressional races have been a real flipper. We don't really know. We've got one here in our area, the 23rd Congressional District race, which we'll touch on a little bit. We're going to kind of wait until the polls close because, I mean, we're focusing right now. But there's a lot at play. There's a lot of like we're seeing with Tom Marino, there's a lot of red districts that could flip.
To get to the 23 necessary to change the House leadership, there's going to have to be at least 23 red districts that flip.
Yeah.
And if one looks at the probability models, it looks like that will happen.
Now, let's do a scenario here. If the Democrats do take the House, do you think it would be smart for them to re-put Nancy Pelosi as that? I mean, that in itself, I know she's got a lot of, I mean, with that, because there is a large contingent in the Democratic Party of, we're seeing these social justice-oriented people or social justice-oriented causes and pushes that are really pushing that party. We saw that over the 2016 election with Bernie Sanders and you know, and his group of people, his supporters that took it all the way down to the convention. What do they have to change in order to keep those millennials?
You're asking the tough questions,
yeah,
tonight,
tough
but that's your job.
Yeah, but you know what? That's okay. There's probably no wrong answer, right?
No, I don't mind answering. It's just an awkward question.
It is a tough one.
I think both political parties are challenged with the need to find more youthful, and I'm saying that as a middle-aged guy.
Yeah.
They've got to find more youthful leaders to be the face of their party, and so moving toward a more youthful leadership model within the Democratic caucus within the House would be my advice. I think the same is true for the Republicans, that you've got to provide some more progressive, youthful vision.
Youthful vision, quite interesting there, and we've been seeing that. I know we saw that in the primary downstate in that congressional race there. So we'll be continuing to bring all this information. I believe, are we going to a cut-in soon, or are we still continuing here on our live webcast? All right, we have 3 more minutes until we have to break into network. It would be great to see some of those slides again, some of those figures of these numbers coming in that we've been seeing. They constantly are changing. Well, this one hasn't yet. So hopefully we can get on that as soon as we can. We have to remember the party. Well, this has just changed again slightly. We're seeing these slight changes. 4% of precincts reporting Bob Casey, still 76%. Lou Barletta, 22% Republican Party. So we should see that. Quite an interesting one. Maybe we can go to the next one and see what's going on. This is the key one right here that we've been looking at, and we're seeing that Tom Marino is starting to pull up a little bit here with a little bit more than he had just a few moments ago. But Mark Frenberger is 63% to a 37%. So it will be interesting to see the dynamic of this race. This is a national race that could go blue, and the eyes of NBC, of course, and the eyes of the nation are on that race. They want to see what's happening. Of course, here we go with Tom Wolf and Scott Wagner running for governor, and Tom Wolf is obviously ahead there. When someone has their second term in office, you know, let's say for Tom Wolf, if it's definitely, we confirm that he's the winner in this race, which we probably will. What do they need to look for and do in a second term? What should they take on in a second term?
You know, in a second term, in most states where there's a term limit process that would not allow them to run again, they can take on tough issues. They can really go to their core instincts and do what they think is right and not worry about the next election. Most of the time, they're still going to be grounded by that core value system, that what they think is the right public policy to pursue, and take on tough issues because they know that they won't necessarily be running for that office again.
All right, we're going to take a quick break here from the website. Join us on the TV in a moment. We've got updates coming in. Keep it right here. Welcome back to our exclusive web coverage of the midterm elections 2018. I'm joined now by outgoing Chemung County Executive Tom Santulli, along with political analyst Dr. Stephen Coleman. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
It's a big night in not only national politics, but politics around the nation. You've been county exec for just a few years.
18.
18. And so this is a big election for the county. What are you thinking? What is some of your predictions for the county?
Well,
or just in general?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you have 3 people running, which is, a good thing, that there certainly is a lot of interest. And you really have a real choice in this election. You have a Mike Cruzen, who served as my deputy for 18 years. You've got Chris Moss, who was ran 4 times for sheriff, has been a very successful sheriff, well known. And Jerome Emanuel, who's a newcomer, but certainly has some background in business. And so there's certainly a lot to choose from. And I'm a big believer that you never know what the public's thinking. Everybody asks me on the street, well, how's this going to happen? How's it going to end? Who's going to get it? And to me, that's what elections are all about. They made their case, and they put it out there. There's roughly 30 people running in all these offices combined. So it's probably one of the largest elections we've had in a long time. And we're going to know in a very short period of time the outcome. And but everybody's worked hard, and again, I'd say it, Mike probably had the most qualifications for the job because he's in it, but everybody brought something to the table. I mean, Chris, again, has won public office 4 times countywide, and so we'll see. And the legislative races will be as interesting, too, because almost everybody, I think all but 2 people have an opponent. So there's a lot going on.
It is pretty packed, and just 10 minutes ago, the polls in New York State closed, so those numbers should start to come in a minute. Dr. Coleman, what is your take on some of this, especially this local race?
Well, my take is this. Do the people of Chemung County want change? If they really want change, it's Jerome Emanuel. If they want to keep cruising along, it's going to be Mike Cruzen. And then Sheriff Moss, again, he's not really a change candidate. He's been around for years. And frankly, I don't think Sheriff Moss has done a good job. My own personal opinion, I'm afraid to walk the streets of Elmira in the evening. I think he's been a failure as sheriff, and now he wants to be promoted as Chemung County executive. To me, give me a break.
Okay, interesting take on that. What about the legislative races we're seeing? There's only a few that are running unopposed, and that's also crucial.
That's wonderful. And the one thing in terms of change, Jerome Emanuel for county executive, if that's what the folks want. But one race we're going to be looking at very closely is in West Elmira, and that's Christina Sonsire against Connie Neal Milliken, the dentist. The Milliken family is to West Elmira as the mulligan is to golf. And so we'll see if they're going to go for Connie Milliken or Christina Sonsire, who's a ball of fire, Zach. She campaigned really hard. She was on the pavement. So I want to see what's going to happen in that West Elmira area. That's my district.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see that. It is interesting that we're seeing a lot of new faces trying to run against,
And I think when change happens, though, Zach, again, I was there a long time, and I think when change does come, a lot of people sometimes come out more often than they did before, and that's their privilege. I always looked at it as everybody has a right to run if you meet the qualifications. One of the problems today is it's hard to find people to run for these offices. It really is. It's good to see a lot of people out. I think Dr. Coleman makes a good point, an exciting race in West Elmira. Hey, Neal Milliken, their family's been there a long time. Connie was chair of the legislature, a great guy. Neal's a very smart individual. Christina Sonsire worked very hard. So that's what campaigns are all about. Yeah. And again, the public will decide. And, I love the competition. There's a lot of competition for the county legislative races this year. And when there's no competition, it bothers me. Rodney Strange does not have an opponent. To me, that's strange. He should have an opponent. There should be competition when it comes to these legislative races.
I want to take a quick look. I don't know if we can see any now. Are the numbers coming in? I'm not seeing. Let's just take a look right here. Not really.
No, it really is early.
It is too early, but there are some races. We're seeing it. This is an interesting. I don't know if. Oh, that's not on the screen. Oh, there we go. State Senator Tom Murray. He's you know, his opponent. You know, I don't know much about her, but it's an interesting race there.
And there's one I would just add something is. That is a hard one. Tom's been 2010. He became a senator. 26. He was in the assembly. He's been here. I thought his opponent was quite quiet. I never really saw much at all.
Well, that's a good point because Amanda, the Democrat, I don't know who she is. She didn't have any money. She has no name recognition. Tom O'Mara. Since the polls are closed, I'll predict Tom O'Mara's going to win and be reelected.
Yeah, that's for sure.
What do you think, Tom Santulli?
Yeah, I think he's going to do well, and rightfully so. I mean, Tom was out there. He covered a lot of ground, and it's hard to compare people when the other person is pretty silent. Because again, I don't think I ever saw her.
That's an interesting statement you say. As covering all this election over the last, we've heard very little from her. So it should be interesting to see. And you know, we hear from Tom a lot and the great work he's done for this community. Moving on, let's see if I know that these races are these numbers are probably not coming in. This is an interesting one here. We had a Democrat. Big Democratic primary, Randy Reed versus Bill Petroni and Christopher Friend. What do you take on this, Dr. Coleman, on the state assembly seat?
Christopher Friend will probably win, but a lot of folks are upset with Christopher Friend. They think he's been the friendly ghost. He hasn't been around much compared to Phil Palmisano. You know, he's just not visible. And he's collecting his money from the state. A lot of people are upset with Christopher Friend, and if he's reelected, he really has to get in the ball and follow the Phil Palmisano model and get out there, be visible, and so forth. Bill Petroni has quite a background in law enforcement. He's a Democrat. He's worked hard, and we'll see how he does. But given the district, it's probably going to be Christopher Friend. The friendly ghost. Yeah,
well, it's interesting. Back to you know, just state politics. The balance of power is at play here in Albany with the Senate, especially. What is your take, Tom, on this?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I look at it. It's very important, and I always say take the party out of this. You know, we always say it's a Republican Senate and it's a Democratic Assembly. You know, and that's true. I think the bigger piece when I try to talk to people is the reason the Republican Senate's important is because it really is all upstate has as its connection. If the Senate goes Democratic, and goes Democrat, and that could really happen this time, I think that's a big loss for upstate because you just lose that balance of power. It really, I can remember the last time the Senate was in the hands of the Democrat. Upstate New York got practically nothing because it was just all centered in New York City. But that could happen tonight.
The Republicans could lose the Senate. Right now, the Republicans have one ahead in the Senate, and that's because there's a Democrat from Brooklyn who sits with the Republicans. So it's razor thin, and the Republicans could lose the state Senate this evening.
And that independent coalition, Democratic coalition, many of those people all got beat in the primary, so they're not even there anymore.
Yeah, so that's true. That was an interesting.
It really creates a void. But again, I think a lot of times when I say Republican, people say, well, that's just politics. It's not. The balance of power was the Republicans more upstate. It kept us in the game. I think we're going to be out of the game if it's all Democratic.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
That's an interesting the shakeup. Also, the balance of power obviously at play in the U.S. House, and I know that just recently the 23rd district was kind of known as a flip district. What's your take on the 23rd with Tom Reed and Tracy Matrano?
Well, I think Reed's going to win, but I think it's going to be very close. Tracy Matrano has campaigned hard, and I think that she is going to have a very good evening. But I think Tom Reed will win. I saw, by the way, that debate last week between Tracy Matrano and Tom Reed at Corning Community College, and I was very upset with her supporters. They were hissing. They were clapping when they shouldn't have clapped. One of the moderators said, wait a minute now, this is a debate, not a rally. I think it was Zach Wheeler who said that.
It was that.
And I think,
somebody I knew.
And I think Tracy Matrano should have exercised some leadership and looked at her supporters and said, listen, this is a debate. Stop hissing, stop booing, stop clapping, and behave yourself. She didn't do that, and I was disappointed in her for her lack of leadership.
Yeah, that does fuel the crowd when you don't have the candidate controlling their people. It just does, and you know. But obviously, and I think that Dr. Coleman's right. They put a big chunk of money into her candidacy in these last in this last month, and usually they won't do that unless there's been an increase in her numbers showing better. But I think Tom's going to win too, but it's going to be a close race. It really is.
Do we have those numbers by any chance? I know there might not be any on there. Obviously, it's only been 20 minutes since the polls closed, but we might not. We might if we do. You could just let me know. You didn't think that my scolding was good enough for those?
I thought you did a good job as the moderator of the debate, Zach, but her supporters were out of control, and I thought it was a disgrace. And it reflected very badly on her and her leadership.
All right.
But I do say this, I think that happens because you guys chose a very large venue.
Yeah.
You know, when you do something relatively small, but that was a big crowd, and it's easy, and they're hard to control.
And I have to say, Corning Community College, absolutely wonderful. They really did
a nice job.
Yeah, they did, and it looked great, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, Kate Douglas, the president of Corning Community College, led everybody in the Pledge of Allegiance, which I thought was wonderful.
Yeah.
And she's a class act. She's really a class act.
Yeah, so we had
a
lot of fun. It was very interesting. It was a good turnout, and it got a lot of, but the numbers obviously you see right now, there's nothing on the screen. Tracy Matrano's team is, obviously we've got Nikita, she's covering Reed's campaign, and Julio's covering Matrano's campaign. So we'll check in with them. Any other numbers that we could check out on just to see some other numbers that are coming in? There's probably not much of the governor's race. That's quite an interesting one. We've got Governor Cuomo going for a third term, which is interesting in New York because there's no. What's your take on that? You know, we've had Pennsylvania where you have to do 2 terms. Well, obviously here's the Pennsylvania governor's race. Tom Wolf looks like he's been the race has been called re-elected for governor of Pennsylvania. There, 69% of the vote against Scott Wagner. So we have Pennsylvania where you can do a 2-term as governor, but then in New York, I feel that you can just keep going.
Yeah, and remember it was Mario Cuomo that ran, I think, for a 4th term that got beat by George Pataki, who was a relatively unknown person at that time. Now, there certainly was a big difference back then. There was a very powerful senator named Alphonse D'Amato, who was a huge fundraiser. So a lot of times people try to compare this race with Molinaro and Andrew Cuomo and say, look what happened with George Pataki. But that was also a different set of circumstances. Alphonse D'Amato was a strong senator. He could raise millions of dollars. The trouble with the last 2 candidates that were both county executives, and Mark's a great guy, but if you only can raise $4 million sounds like a lot of money, but you're talking about an Andrew Cuomo, who I think was raised since he's been governor, about $100 million. It's hard to compete in that New York City area just for press time, you know, media time.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen tonight.
Let's show these numbers while we talk about this, which is pretty interesting. We're seeing these numbers real quick, not to cut you off.
There you go.
Andrew Cuomo, 70% of the vote. I'm guessing NBC's calling this. We're calling it so far. Elected for a 2nd term. Well, actually, this is his 3rd term. This will be his 3rd term as governor of New York, Mark Molinaro, and Howie Hawkins, which is interesting because there was a lot of call for Larry Sharp from the millennial generation, and I actually expected him to be in that 3rd spot, but it looks like right now, Howie Hawkins. What do you think these parties, these third parties, are going to start to emerge? I mean, we've always had third parties. I remember Ross Perot all the way back in the day. It's interesting to see how these third parties play.
Well, third parties, I think, in American politics, Zach, are issue parties. They want to make statements. They want to call attention to something, but they're not serious contenders. And Andrew Cuomo is going to win this. Howie Hawkins has no chance. And in general, the Democrats statewide are going to win this evening. The last Republican to win statewide was in 2002, and that was George Pataki. When he was first elected, he was an unknown from Peekskill, New York, and he won. But otherwise, New York is a Democratic state. The Democrats outnumber the Republicans 2-1.
All right, interesting here.
And Mark will do very well upstate, but when it comes to downstate, you get clobbered.
You know, that's true. When we see those numbers break down in the coming day, obviously, or later tonight, as these numbers continue, we will see that breakdown. And it's always unique to see that the rest of the state is red, and then we've got New York City, which is hardcore blue, and then the surrounding communities around New York City also fall into those lines as well.
And Tom makes a good point. The Republicans need to keep the Senate. Otherwise, the governor is a Democrat, the other statewide officials are Democrats, the Assembly's Democratic, and what's left for the Republicans? Nothing.
Yeah, what's left for the Republicans? But, you know, if Cuomo gets in there, obviously, for a third term, and then we've got the presidential election, do you think he's going to push for that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, he certainly has ambition to do it, but, you know, that's a whole different world because the scrutiny. I mean, part of the problem I think for anybody in New York, and Trump was not a politician, is that New York State's one of the highest tax states in the nation. It always becomes in a lot of these states, got a lot of big social programs. There's a lot of these states that don't see that as where they want to go. So I mean, I always tell people other than Trump, make a list of all the people from New York City that have become, or from New York that have become president. It's a small group.
We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be back, obviously, on our television for full coverage. WETM-TV.com.